Picture a pirate captain in the year 1800, somewhere in the wide blue emptiness of the Atlantic. He is having the best week of his life. 2 days ago, he ran down a Spanish trader heavy with sugar and silver, and right now that captured cargo is sitting in his hold while his men pass a bottle around the deck and laugh at how easy it was. His ship is long and lean and fast. That speed is the whole secret of his trade. He does not fight ships that can catch him, and nothing catches him, because the moment trouble appears on the horizon, he simply turns downwind and vanishes. He has been doing this for years. He has never once been caught. So when his lookout calls down that there is a single sail to the northeast, the captain barely looks up. One ship is nothing. He gives the order to come about and run, the way he always does, confident that in an hour the stranger will be a speck, and in 2 hours it will be gone. He goes back to his bottle. An hour later the stranger is not a speck. It is bigger. It is closer. It is gaining on him in the exact wind that has saved his life 100 times before, and now the captain is standing at the stern rail with a spyglass pressed to his eye, and his hands are not quite steady. He can see her clearly now. One long, low, beautiful hull, a single row of gun ports, a cloud of canvas stacked so high it looks like a thunderhead. And he understands, all at once and far too late, that he has made a terrible mistake. He cannot outrun her because she is faster than he is. He cannot outfight her because she carries more guns than he has men. He does the only arithmetic that matters to a pirate, and the answer is that he is already dead. That ship bearing down on him was a frigate. And this exact moment, the moment a confident predator realizes he has become the prey, played out across 2 centuries of ocean history, on every sea where men sailed under a black flag. But here is the strange part. The frigate was not built by kings to hunt pirates. So how did this one ship become the single most feared thing a pirate could ever see on the horizon? The answer begins, of all places, with the pirates themselves. To understand where the frigate came from, you have to go back to the cold, gray waters of the North Sea in the early 1600s, to a port called Dunkirk. The word frigate is old, older than the ship we are talking about. It drifted up out of the Mediterranean centuries earlier, from the Italian Frigate and the French Frigate, and at first it just meant a small, fast, lightly armed vessel, a galley-type thing with oars and sails and almost no protection. It was a word for speed, not for war, and the men who turned that word into a legend were not admirals. They were raiders. The privateers of Dunkirk were sea robbers with paperwork. They sailed out of that port to prey on the merchant shipping of their enemies, and they had one problem to solve above all others. They needed to catch fat, slow trading vessels, take everything worth taking, and then disappear before any navy could arrive to make them pay. So they built ships to do exactly that. Long in the hull, narrow in the beam, cut low to the water so they slice through the waves instead of bullying over them, rigged tall to carry every scrap of wind. These were ships designed for one purpose: to chase, to strike, and to run. The Dunkirkers called them frigates, and they worked so brutally well that the great naval powers of Europe, the Dutch and the English, found themselves being robbed blind by them. The response of any sensible navy when an enemy invents a better weapon is not to complain about it. It is to steal it. The Dutch began building their own long, fast frigates to hunt the Dunkirk raiders. The English watched the Dutch and did the same. And so the most feared pirate hunter the ocean would ever know was born as a copy of a pirate ship, reverse-engineered by navvies who had been on the receiving end of it. Keep that in your mind, because it is the heart of this entire story. The hunter and the hunted came from the same bloodline. They always had. Now, what exactly made this ship so special? Because plenty of vessels were fast and plenty were heavily armed, and the trick that made the frigate dangerous was that it refused to choose between the two. For most of naval history, a warship designer faced a brutal trade. You could build a floating fortress, a ship with 2 or even 3 full decks of cannon, a vessel that could shatter anything it met. But all that weight of timber and iron and gunpowder made it slow and clumsy, a castle that happened to float. Or you could build something quick and light, A ship that could go anywhere and catch anything, but which would be smashed to splinters the instant a real warship caught it in open water. Speed or strength. You picked one and you lived with the other. The frigate cheated. The breakthrough was the way builders arranged the guns. Instead of stacking cannon on two heavy decks, the mature frigate carried its main battery on a single covered gun deck running the length of the ship, with a few lighter pieces up top. That one decision changed everything. By giving up a second deck of guns, the designers stripped away tons of weight from high up in the ship, and they used the room they saved to make the hull longer and finer and faster than any heavy warship could ever be. The French had a verb for what they did to those hulls. They said the frigate was built long and low, and a long, low hull does two things beautifully. It slips through the water with far less drag, and it gives gunners a long, straight platform to fire a devastating broadside, every cannon on one side of the ship roaring at once. The sailors of the age looked at these long, lean, elegant ships tearing across the waves, and they reached for the only word that fit. They called them the greyhounds of the sea. And a greyhound, remember, is bred for exactly one thing: to run something down. By the middle of the 1700s, the frigate had stopped being a clever idea and become an institution. Every serious navy on Earth had standardized it, slotting it into formal rating systems that ranked warships by their number of guns. The monsters at the top, the 100-gun behemoths, were first rates. The frigate sat lower down the list, usually a 5th or 6th rate, typically carrying somewhere between 28 and 44 guns. On paper, that made it a minor vessel, a junior member of the fleet. In reality, it became the most useful warship afloat, and the men who commanded the great battle fleets knew it. The frigate was not meant to stand in the line of battle and trade broadsides with floating fortresses. It was meant to roam. It scouted ahead of the slow battle squadrons, ranging miles out to find the enemy and race back with the news, which is why one of the most famous admirals in history called frigates the eyes of the fleet, and why he spent a remarkable amount of his career complaining that he never had enough of them. No commander ever felt he had enough frigates. They were always too few and always somewhere else, because there was always one more convoy to protect, one more coast to watch, one more raider to chase. And the men lucky enough to command them became something the Navy had never quite produced before: celebrities. A frigate captain operated alone, far from the fleet, free to make his own decisions and chase his own glory, and a successful one came home rich and famous, his exploits printed in newspapers, his name known in taverns and drawing rooms alike. In an age before film stars and athletes, the frigate captain was the closest thing the public had to a rock star, and young officers schemed and begged and called in every favor they had for the chance to get one of these commands. Nobody dreamed of a desk on a battleship. They dreamed of the open sea and a greyhound under their feet. So what did all these greyhounds actually do? They hunted. Strip away the scouting and the signaling and the glory, and the daily work of the frigate was the relentless, unglamorous business of protecting trade and destroying the men who attacked it. A frigate escorted convoys of merchant ships across dangerous waters, a single warship shepherding dozens of fat, defenseless traders. A frigate patrolled the choke points and the trade routes where raiders liked to lurk. And when a pirate or an enemy privateer was sighted, the frigate did the thing it had been bred from birth to do. It gave chase. This is where the frigate became the nightmare of every sea robber alive, because it closed the one loophole that piracy depended on. A pirate's entire business model rested on a simple bet. The bet was that he could always run. He could attack the weak and flee from the strong, because the strong, the lumbering warships, could never catch him. The frigate broke that bet in half. It was strong like a warship and fast like a pirate, and there was suddenly no safe distance, no friendly horizon, nowhere to disappear to. When a young nation on the far side of the Atlantic found its merchant ships being seized and its sailors dragged into slavery by the corsairs of the North African coast, it did not build floating fortresses to answer the threat. It could not afford them, and they would have been useless anyway, far too slow to catch a fast raider in coastal waters. Instead, it authorized the construction of a handful of large, powerful frigates, ships fast enough to chase the corsairs and strong enough to crush them, and sent them across an ocean to hunt. The frigate was not a side weapon in the war on piracy. The frigate was the weapon. To see just how perfectly the frigate fit that job, you have to look at what else was on the water and understand why none of it could do what the frigate did. Picture the whole range of fighting ships laid out side by side. At one extreme stood the ships of the line, the giants, vessels of 64, 74, even 100 guns, with multiple decks of cannon and crews running into the hundreds. In a stand-up fight, a ship of the line was a god. It could turn any smaller vessel into floating wreckage in a single thunderous exchange. But ask that god to chase a nimble pirate through shallow coastal water, and it was hopeless. A heavyweight champion trying to catch a pickpocket in a crowd, too slow, too deep in the water, too expensive to risk on such errands in the first place. At the other extreme were the small fry, the sloops and the brigs and the cutters, little vessels carrying a handful of guns. These were quick and cheap and useful for carrying messages or patrolling a quiet stretch of coast, but they were dangerously weak. A sloop might catch a pirate and then discover, too late, that the pirate had more men and more guns than it did, and the hunter would become the victim. And in the Mediterranean there was the corsair's own favorite, the xebec, a fast, lateen-rigged raider beautifully suited to those warm coastal waters but never built to slug it out in the open ocean. So look at the lineup again. The ship of the line could win any fight but could not catch anyone. The sloop could chase but could not win. The xebec belonged to the very pirates the navies were trying to destroy. And right in the middle, occupying the one position that mattered, sat the frigate, fast enough to catch the runners and strong enough to beat the fighters. It was not the most powerful ship on the sea, and it was not the fastest. It was the deadliest combination of the two, and in the work of hunting pirates, that combination was everything. This is the secret at the center of the whole story, the reason the frigate ruled the oceans for the better part of 200 years. It was a ship that won by refusing to specialize. Think about what that balance actually meant in practice for a frigate captain alone on the open sea. If he sighted something he could beat, he simply ran it down, because almost nothing afloat that was worth attacking could outrun him. If he sighted something too powerful to fight, a ship of the line that could blow him out of the water, he turned and used that same blistering speed to escape, and the giant could not follow. He was fast enough to choose every fight and strong enough to win the ones he chose. He could only be trapped by very bad luck or his own mistake. And there was one more thing the frigate had that the floating fortresses did not, something that made it not just effective but coveted. It could operate completely alone. A frigate did not need to stay tethered to a fleet. It could be sent off on its own for months at a time to roam a vast stretch of ocean, answerable to nobody, its captain a king on his own small floating kingdom. And out there, alone, that captain could get rich. The navies of the age paid prize money. Capture an enemy ship or a pirate vessel and the value of that ship and its cargo was divided among the crew, with the captain taking the largest share. A frigate captain who took a few good prizes during a war could come home wealthier than men born into noble families. And that possibility, the dream of independent command and a fortune in prize money and a famous name, is exactly why every ambitious officer in every navy wanted a frigate more than he wanted almost anything else in the world. The ship that terrorized pirates was also the ship that made fortunes. It was, in every sense, the most desirable hunting license on the sea. But the most haunting chapter in the frigate's history is the one that proves how thin the line really was between the hunter and the prey, and it happened in the autumn of 1803, in the warm water off the North African city of Tripoli. The young American Navy had sent its frigates across the Atlantic to fight the Barbary corsairs. And one of those ships was a powerful frigate named the Philadelphia. On the last day of October, she was chasing a corsair vessel toward the coast, running fast in pursuit, doing the very thing she was built to do, when she drove hard onto an uncharted reef and stuck fast. Everything that had made her deadly now turned against her in an instant. She was stranded, helpless, unable to maneuver, and the corsairs swarmed out from the harbor in their small boats like wolves onto a wounded bull. The crew was captured, the ship was taken, and here the corsairs realized they had been handed something far more valuable than a few hundred prisoners. They had captured an entire American frigate, intact, floating in their own harbor under the protection of their own guns. They could repair her and turn her against the very navy that built her, and worse, they could study her, copy her, learn to build her and breed a fleet of frigates of their own. The greatest pirate hunter ever built was about to become the greatest pirate ship ever built. The Americans could not allow it, and so a young lieutenant named Stephen Decatur volunteered for one of the most audacious missions in naval history. Decatur, as it happened, had grown up in the city the captured frigate was named for, and he had been drawn to the sea in the first place by stories of his own father's privateering raids during the Revolution, which is to say that the man sent to deny a frigate to pirates carried a little pirate blood in his own veins. On a February night in 1804, Decatur and roughly 75 volunteers crept toward Tripoli Harbor aboard a small captured ketch they had renamed the Intrepid, disguised as a harmless merchant vessel, drifting slowly through the dark water beneath the massed cannon of the city's fortress. They claimed to have lost their anchors in a storm and asked to tie up alongside the Philadelphia for the night. They were waved in. And the moment they were close enough, Decatur gave the order, and his men poured over the rail and onto the deck of the captured frigate, overwhelming her guards in a few violent minutes. They could not sail her out. There was no time, so they did the only thing left. They set her on fire. They put the most feared warship in the harbor to the torch and scrambled back aboard the Intrepid as the flames climbed her rigging and lit up the whole harbor like a sunrise. And they slipped away under the roar of the awakening shore batteries, having lost, almost unbelievably, not a single man. The fire reached her magazine and the Philadelphia tore herself apart. The story raced across the world, and legend holds that even the greatest admiral of the age, looking on from across the Mediterranean, called it the most bold and daring act of his time, though whether he ever truly said those words is a question historians still argue over. What is not in doubt is the lesson burning in that harbor. The line between the hunter and the hunted was one reef wide. The same ship that terrorized pirates could, with one wrong turn in the dark, become the prize that pirates dreamed of. For all its dominance, the frigate's reign rested on a single fragile assumption, and the day that assumption broke, the whole age ended almost overnight. Everything that made the frigate the queen of the seas, its speed, its reach, its ability to choose its fights and escape the ones it could not win, depended entirely on one thing: the wind. A frigate was a sailing ship, and a sailing ship is a prisoner of the weather. It can only go where the wind allows, at the speed the wind permits, and when the wind dies, the Greyhound becomes a log drifting on a flat sea. For 2 centuries that did not matter because every ship faced the same master, and the frigate simply played the wind better than anything else afloat. But in the early 1800s, while frigate captains were still chasing pirates across the oceans, a few inventors were tinkering with a machine that would make the wind irrelevant: the steam engine. A steamship did not care which way the wind blew or whether it blew at all. It could move in a dead calm. It could drive straight into the teeth of a gale. It could go in any direction at any time at a speed its captain chose, and the moment that technology grew reliable enough to put into a warship, every single advantage the frigate had spent 200 years building simply evaporated. A sailing frigate could not outrun a steam-powered ship because the steamship was not waiting on the wind. It could not slip away into a calm because the calm that trapped the frigate meant nothing to an engine. The Greyhound had finally met something faster, and it was not a better sail. It was a fire in an iron belly turning a wheel. The age of fighting sail, the long era of canvas and cannon and lone captains hunting under the stars, drew to a close not because anyone built a better frigate, but because the world stopped needing the wind. And a ship whose entire genius was the mastery of the wind had nothing left to offer a world that had moved beyond it. And yet the frigate did not die. That is the part of the story almost nobody expects. The wooden sailing frigates were retired, broken up for timber, or left to rot at their moorings, but a handful survived, and one of them survived in a way that turned it into something close to immortal. In the harbor of Boston to this day floats a ship called the Constitution, launched in 1797 as one of the very first frigates of the American Navy. She was one of those large, powerful frigates built to hunt the Barbary corsairs, and she fought through the wars of her age and earned, in a famous battle, the nickname Old Ironsides, after enemy cannonballs were seen bouncing off her tough oak hull. By the 1830s she was old and worn, and the Navy planned to scrap her, until a public outcry, sparked by a single famous poem written in her defense by a man named Oliver Wendell Holmes, shamed the government into saving her instead. And so she endured. Repaired and rebuilt over and over across the centuries, she remains in commission to this day, the oldest commissioned warship still afloat anywhere on Earth, and every year roughly 600,000 people walk her decks in Boston Harbor, standing where her gun crews once stood, touching the timbers of a real frigate from the great age of sail. The name itself survived too. Long after the last wooden greyhound was gone, navies kept the word, and even now in fleets full of steel and missiles and radar, the warships built to be fast, independent cruisers, sent off alone to patrol and escort and hunt, are still called frigates. The ship changed completely. The idea behind it never did. So what do we make of all this? The greyhound born from pirate blood, the hunter that became a prize, the queen of the seas dethroned by a fire in an iron belly. The frigate teaches a lesson that goes far beyond ships and oceans, and it is not the lesson you might expect. It would be easy to say the frigate proves that the strongest weapon wins, but that is not true at all, because the frigate was never the strongest thing on the water. The ships of the line could have blown it apart. It would be just as easy to say speed wins, but that is not true either, because plenty of vessels were faster. The frigate won and ruled and outlived almost everything around it, for a stranger reason. It refused to be only one thing. It was fast enough and strong enough and free enough all at once, and in a world full of specialists, the giant that could only fight and the minnow that could only run, the frigate's genius was that it could adapt to almost any situation it sailed into. That is what made it the most feared thing a pirate could see, and that is what kept its name alive for centuries after its sails came down. And the deepest truth of the frigate is the one we started with, the one burning in Tripoli harbor on that February night. The hunter and the hunted were always built from the same blood. The navies that destroyed the pirates did it by becoming a little more like the pirates, by stealing the raider's own ship and turning it back against him. The frigate was a pirate's idea, perfected by the men who hunted pirates, and in the end it could not even tell the difference, serving any flag, chasing any prey, as comfortable as a robber as it was a policeman. Strength did not win the oceans. Speed did not win the oceans. Adaptability won, the simple, ruthless ability to be whatever the moment demanded, and that is a lesson that has never once been confined to the sea. The age of the sailing frigate is over. The pirates it hunted are dust, and the corsairs of Tripoli are a memory, and the wind that once decided the fate of nations now just fills the sails of tourists. But Old Ironside still floats in Boston, quiet and proud, and the name frigate still rides the seas on ships her builders could never have imagined, because the idea was always too good to die. If you enjoyed sailing through this piece of forgotten history with us, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling us which warship or weapon you want us to uncover next, and smash that like button so more people can discover the greyhound of the sea that taught the whole world to be afraid of a single sail on the horizon.